Sehr geehrte MedienvertreterInnen,
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear representatives of the media, I wish you very well welcome to the press conference on the Amnesty International Human Rights Award 2022. It is lovely to have you here, and also a warm welcome to the audience taking part via our live stream. It's lovely to have you here. My name is Ellen Wesemüller. I am the press spokesperson of Amnesty International Germany. The German section of Amnesty International awards the Human Rights Award every 2 years. The award includes a prize money of 10,000 euros and it's being awarded for the 11th time this year. Today we are very pleased to present the award to the Ethiopian Human Rights Council, or EHRCO in short.
We
definitely have the great honor to welcome the Executive Director of EHRCO, Yirga Haile, with us today. Welcome, Dan. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for being here.
And thank you for being here.
Ebenso freuen wir uns,
We're furthermore pleased to welcome Mary Lawlor, Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders at the United Nations.
We are very happy to have you
here with us, Mary.
A very warm welcome.
A very warm welcome. Great to have you.
Zu meiner Linken sitzt Markus N.
On my left, there is Markus N, Beeko, the Secretary General of Amnesty International in Germany. And I would also like to welcome Franziska Düsterhoff. She is an Africa expert at Amnesty International in Germany, and she's here today in the audience. Lovely to have you here. Now I would like to provide you with some housekeeping rules or a few words regarding our agenda. Markus and Beeko will begin and explain why Amnesty International opted for this year's laureate. Afterwards, Dan will follow and have the opportunity to present the work of EHRCO and its difficult conditions in the current situation. And then we will have Mary Lawlor providing us with an overview of the UN's work on human rights defenders under threat and the current situation. Afterwards, you're welcome to ask your questions. If you're taking part in this event virtually, please post your questions in the chat and we will read them. And you are definitely free to ask your questions in German or English. And then 11:45, our participants will be ready for interviews. And now I would like to start with Markus and Beeko.
Verehrte Gäste und
Distinguished guests and media representatives, good morning. A 14-year-old girl from Amhara in northern Ethiopia told us about her horrific rape by Tigrayan fighters. She said, "We do not talk about what happened. It is unimaginable." Many survivors of human rights violations cannot talk about what they have experienced for a long time, and when they do so, it takes them a lot to overcome what they've been through. And it takes them great courage. So reaching out to these survivors of crimes, listening to them and ensuring that their voices are heard by the global public and those responsible, also takes great courage in many places around the world. It takes the courage of human rights defenders who support survivors, talk to eyewitnesses, write reports and bring them to the public's attention. You need courage because all this is dangerous in Ethiopia and all over the world. The Ethiopian Human Rights Council, EHRCO in short, is a group of human rights defenders. The organization does not turn a blind eye where others look away. They listen, they document what happened, and they talk about it. That is why the EHRCO itself is under threat and in danger. Employees have been defamed, threatened, imprisoned, tortured, and in one case shot dead in the street.
The Amnesty Human Rights Award 2022 goes to the independent Ethiopian Human Rights Council, in short EHRCO, for the organization's high-risk efforts to highlight human rights violations in the country and bring them to the public's attention. EHRCO is the oldest independent human rights organization in Ethiopia. For over 30 years, they have worked tirelessly to ensure that human rights violations are investigated, they provide legal advice to those affected, and offer human rights education to civil society. We are honored that Yirga Haile, Executive Director of EHRCO, can be here with us today in person. Der Amnesty Menschenrechtspreis
Award 2022 goes to the Ethiopian Human Rights Council for its high-risk efforts to shed light on human rights violations in the country. EHRCO is the oldest independent human rights organization in the country, and for more than 30 years it has been working to ensure that human rights violations are investigated, that those affected receive legal advice and support, and it furthermore organizes human rights education programs. So states and armed groups commit war crimes and significant violations of humanitarian international law in numerous places around the world. And this is a striking observation of Amnesty International's latest annual report. And this is currently the reality in Ukraine. It's just the tip of the iceberg, what happens in Ukraine. It has happened, it's happening again. Violations of human rights are about to happen in Libya, Syria, Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Myanmar, or in Congo. And it has been happening in northern Ethiopia for the last year and a half. In the conflict in the Ethiopian province of Tigray, the armed forces on all sides are responsible for serious human rights violations, including crimes against humanity. Massacres of civilians, rape, and sexual slavery are part of the warfare, as were also targeted ethnic cleansings in the West Tigray region. The conflict in northern Ethiopia has consequences throughout the whole country. Arbitrary detentions since November 2021 have affected activists in the Tigray region, as well as journalists reporting on the situation there. Even though the conflict has supposedly been settled, the news of the past week continue to draw a dramatic picture. Thousands of people have been arrested, including media workers and high-ranking former military officers. Even the State Human Rights Commission speaks of human rights violations and arbitrariness. Looking at Ukraine, Russia, Ethiopia, and many other places in the world, and makes clear and shows tremendously that the respect of freedom of information and expression, the necessary prosecution of human rights crimes, and the protection of the independent press, civil society, and courageous human rights defenders, all this needs our consistent support for stability, justice, and peace in the world. And wherever human rights and critical voices are in danger, there is a need for a beacon of hope like EHRCO, and these human rights defenders need our consistent solidarity, whether it is in Addis, Moscow, or Istanbul. We will hear later from our UN Special Rapporteur on the situation. And on this occasion of this award ceremony, Amnesty International reminds the German government of its responsibility, and we have to support human rights defenders, and we have to act and react and welcome them where it is necessary. So first of all, we have to implement human rights-based foreign policy in a coherent and concrete manner, support and protect human rights defenders. We have to welcome them whether they come from Russia, Afghanistan, Turkey, or other places in the world. And the main element of cooperation with Ethiopia should be the support of civil society. This is what we want, or what we ask, and what we call upon the Ethiopian government to do is, and this is of utmost importance, and we would like to insist on the prosecution of war crimes, and we call upon the Ethiopian government to enable and facilitate humanitarian access to the conflict region, and also provide access to independent human rights organizations, to end arbitrary arrests and release all persons detained for political or ethnic reasons, and to guarantee freedom of expression and freedom of the press. And the human rights situation in Ethiopia, like the situation of human rights defenders worldwide, needs more attention. I'm very pleased that we will now hear from Dan and Mary Lawlor on this situation. Thank you very much, Markus. So regarding the current situation of human rights in Ethiopia and the difficult work for human rights defenders, we now hear Dan Yirga Haile, the executive manager, a director of EHRCO. So the floor is yours.
Greetings. I feel very much honored to be here as a recipient of the 11th International Human Rights Award of the 2022 of Amnesty International. I would like to thank Amnesty International for awarding this prestigious award and honoring our human rights efforts. This award will play undoubtedly a significant role, as it is a recognition for EHRCO for its 30 years long and thorny human rights defending and promotion activities. This will also boost the determination of all the staffs, members, including supporters of EHRCO, to do more. This recognition, this prestigious prize, will also invite regional and international recognition for Ethiopian Human Rights Council. Current Ethiopian human rights situation. The present human rights condition appears to be quite difficult in Ethiopia, with the main concern being the war in northern Ethiopia. The war is still far from over, still causing lots of suffrage to innocent civilians. In Tigray and in adjacent regions, humanitarian help needs to be increased without restriction. Millions are becoming internally displaced due to the unabating conflicts, and IDP camps also are in immediate need of basic supplies, such as but not limited to food, clean water, medicine, and proper shelter. In recent weeks, the government started a mass arrest against journalists, human rights defenders, activists, political party members, opinion leaders, and as well as individuals. This is a dangerous and arbitrary move. Not only it violates the law and human rights principles, but also it will clearly restrict the press freedom and civic space in Ethiopia. EHRCO is continuously voicing and releasing statements indicating its grave concerns and been relentlessly calling the government of Ethiopia to respect human rights, press freedom, and to work for the sustainable peace in Ethiopia. Additional efforts, Ethiopian Human Rights Council is working a social media campaign together with Amnesty International and Center for Advancement of Rights and Democracy, in short, CARD, which is based in Ethiopia. The Twitter campaign including hashtags such as Raise Your Voice, Peace Storm Ethiopia, and for this cause, about 20 other human rights organizations in Ethiopia have joined us. We also wrote open letter to Ethiopian government, and particularly for Prime Minister of Ethiopia and other government officials and institutions, for them to play for positive role and avoid incitement and hate speech. Finally, I would like to call the Ethiopian government, all warring sides, to stop the war and sit for dialogue to bring sustainable peace in Ethiopia. I like also to call various national, regional, and international community, including the German government, to join their hands to bring sustainable peace, the respect of human rights, and democracy in Ethiopia by assisting and also pushing all the stakeholders in Ethiopia, so including the government. In my conclusion, I would like also to call all pro-human rights entities, donors, like-minded human rights organizations, and to help our efforts so we could bring the change for human rights underlings in Ethiopia. As human rights are universal, we all need a consolidated efforts and help from all those who can assist us for our human rights protection and promotion in Ethiopia. Thank you so much.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much.
Zur aktuellen Lage von
We now hear from UN Special Rapporteur Mary Lawlor on the current situation of human rights defenders under threat worldwide and the particular importance of organizations like EHRCO. So Mary Lawlor, UN Special Rapporteur, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be in Berlin today to present the Ethiopian Human Rights Council with the 11th Amnesty International Human Rights Award. My role as United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders is to monitor the situation of human rights defenders globally and the risks that they face as a result of their peaceful work. Drawing on that global perspective, the achievements of the Ethiopian Human Rights Council over the last 30 years have been nothing short of remarkable. Time and again, in the most challenging of circumstances, staff and volunteers at the Ethiopian Human Rights Council have risked their lives, liberty and well-being to promote the cause of human rights in Ethiopia and to raise the alarm to the outside world. Today, while much of the media and political attention in Europe is focused on the war in Ukraine, we owe a great deal and a great debt of gratitude to the Ethiopian Human Rights Council for bringing to light the terrible atrocities and human rights violations occurring in another conflict zone, which is all too often, sadly, overlooked. At great personal risk, the Ethiopian Human Rights Council are making sure that the failure of the international community to act on the situation in Ethiopia cannot be explained away by lack of knowledge. Yet the Ethiopian Human Rights Council has been here before, has lived through internal suppression and external apathy, and it has continued to deliver. I remember talking at length to a human rights defender from the Ethiopian Human Rights Council 17 years ago, who was in great danger. He told me about his life and the relentless pressure under which he lived. He did not want any personal publicity or recognition, and while doing his work, he hid behind his professional qualification for security reasons. While the environment in Ethiopia has changed somewhat, and we are now at least in a position to celebrate the work of the Ethiopian Human Rights Council publicly, that spirit of selflessness has remained and continues to drive the ethos of the organization in its work today. Human rights awards matter. They matter to human rights defenders in places where the public do not or are too scared to support their work. They matter because they bestow a legitimacy that says even though your government has reneged on its human rights commitments, we know you have not. And we recognize and we applaud your credible and trusted work. They matter because human rights have been agreed, codified, and integrated into international law, yet states and non-state actors around the world are chipping away at those rights. This chipping away of rights, if allowed to continue, is destined to result in a colder, more sterile place, more sterile world. Just look at how the winners of the last award, crew members of the search and rescue ship, the Juventa, are being treated by the Italian justice system. Pre-trial hearings of 4 crew members opened 10 years ago on charges of facilitating illegal entry into Italy of people whom they rescued from the Mediterranean Sea. Amnesty International was not allowed observe the pre-trial hearing. I hope journalists who are covering this award are also following their trial, as it is an example of the trend towards criminalization of solidarity that we are seeing all over the world. But for now, this is the Ethiopian Human Rights Council's Day, and I really want to finish by extending my warmest congratulations to the organization and to Dan himself on winning this prestigious award.
Thank you so much.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much.
Ja, wir eröffnen das
Now,
Panel
I would
jetzt
like
für
to
Fragen.
open the panel, the floor, for your questions. Please tell me your name and the media company, the media outlet you work for. You can also put in your questions, or you can type them into the chat if you are taking part virtually online. So there aren't any questions, so I would like to seize this opportunity to ask or to raise a question.
Can you hear me?
Dan, can you hear me? All right. So, because I will ask my question in German and it will be translated. So, you talked about the arrests last week, and for many observers here in our country, they were quite surprised because the state of emergency was actually lifted in February this year, and the situation seemed to be easing a bit. Can you please tell us about what happened, who has been arrested, and maybe you can give us some information or your opinion on why did this happen now or just last week?
Yes, please, please.
So you told us about the journalists and human rights defenders being arrested last week. For many of us, this came as a surprise because the state of emergency was lifted in February and everyone thought that peace was about to happen. But the opposite was true, as we learn now. Could you maybe share with us what your organization saw, who was being arrested and why, and maybe also why at this point?
Okay, thank you very much. Recent weeks, the government has started to arrest, many journalists, human rights defenders, political party members, and individuals as well. This is happening maybe because the international attention, including the media, the UN as well, have now shifted to the Ukraine situation. That's fine to give attention for Ukraine situation. I'm not against it, but it should not, forget the other parts of the world, and particularly the Ethiopian human rights situation. So, what is going on, especially the attacks against, human rights defenders and journalists would, clearly restrict the media space and also the civic space in Ethiopia. So this is really what is going on in Ethiopia currently.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, Mary Lawlor, I have a question for you too. Can you hear me in English when I'm?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Sie haben sehr
Right, so you gave a very powerful account of the humility and professionalism of human rights defenders, and you talked about the enormous amount of stress and this feeling of living in fear. And do you think that the international community is doing enough to protect human rights defenders under threat?
No, the international community never does enough to protect human rights defenders under threat. And, there are some simple steps that could be taken that could improve the protection of human rights defenders. So, for example, as Dan said, we really need media attention on what is happening in Ethiopia and the plight of human rights defenders in trying to expose what is happening in Ethiopia. One of the things I've learned since I've taken up this mandate is the thing that governments hate most is reputational damage. And the only way they get reputational damage is if they are exposed in the media. So I would encourage any of the journalists here to really try and follow the Ethiopian Human Rights Council and expose what is happening, which they will be able to document and report to you as a trusted interlocutor. The second thing that needs to happen, and I'm encouraged by Germany's commitment to human rights, and particularly because of my mandate to the protection of human rights defenders. But I think, like for any other EU member state, Germany needs to mainstream its protection of human rights defenders more systematically through its embassies on the ground. and in this case through the German embassy in Ethiopia, in Addis. And you know, it's not rocket science. Whoever the person is, whoever the person who is responsible for human rights in the embassy is, and according to the EU guidelines, there should be somebody's name up on a website saying who is responsible for human rights. They can invite the Ethiopian Human Rights Council to the embassy. They can visit them in their place of work. They can issue public statements about how their work is legitimate and trusted and credible. And they can raise cases with the government to show that they are concerned about this person and this person shouldn't be attacked. And certainly any time there are killings of defenders, they should be very quick off the mark to condemn those killings. It's about creating a culture by the embassies on the ground through their governments of showing that there are certain standards that must be adhered to. So that would be one thing. And then other states, you know, the other states that are, say, talk the talk, use the rhetoric, say they are a great supporter of human rights and human rights defenders, they need also to step up to the mark and to be seen, to put their not money where their mouth is, so that helps too, but to take up the cases of human rights defenders. At the UN level, I'm an independent expert of the UN serving in a voluntary position, so I don't really know much about the actual system. But the way that my mandate allows me to work, which I do, is I raise cases of individual human rights defenders with the oppressive state through these formal letters called communications. I also follow up with the oppressive government in an effort to try and persuade them to take positive action on that defender. And I also use social media as much as I can. And that's the extent of my mandate.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much.
Markus,
So Markus, you said that in order to respect freedom of information and expression, that it needs more consistent support. And do you think that this narrowing of the civil space that we see in Ethiopia, that it's something that Amnesty is also perceiving and seeing elsewhere in the world?
The actual Amnesty International report shows that restrictions and limitations to freedom of expression, to civic space, are widespread and they are systematic, and that's why they also need a systematic response from the international community, be it by supporting journalists and human rights defenders on the ground, but also speaking up. We've seen numbers of new restrictive laws come in. I think Amnesty has documented over the last 4 years in over 60 countries, restrictive laws have been put on civil society, on freedom of expression, on the use of media and technology. And this is something which is not enoughly addressed in multinational forum, but also in bilateral conversations. And it's so important that we actually support those who are on the front line, who are actually defending rule of law, transparency, accountability, and human rights. And so therefore, it's really important, and Amnesty has made it one of its strategic priorities over the next years to support and defend the right to protest, to information, and to freedom of assembly, and to demonstrate.
Thank you very much.
Gibt es weitere Fragen?
Are there further questions?
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren,
This is not the case. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So we just arrived at the end of our press conference. Thank you for taking part and thank you for being here.